You are recording.
Thank you and good morning. This is a work session of the Anchorage Assembly on 2024 budget amendments. Today is the 9th of November. We are in an emergency snow situation, so we are pivoting to a Teams meeting, which we haven't done for a long time, and I apologize. My dog is conditioned to bark whenever I'm in a Teams meeting. And with that said, we have a pretty tight timeline, but we need to go ahead and do introductions to make sure we get all the members on the record. Madam Clerk, I think that would be the best way, is to have you do the roll just like we normally would, because hard to keep people kind of timed.
Yes, so Chair Constant,
Here,
Vice Chair Zalatel. Here. Member Brawley. Here. Member Bolland.
Here.
Member Cross.
Here.
Member Stolt.
Here.
Member Rivera.
Present.
Member Johnson. Member Johnson is here. He's muted.
Here. Sorry.
Member Bronga. I do not see Member Bronga in the list. Member Myers.
he's trying to log in, but he's having some trouble.
Member, oh, I just saw Karen pop on. Karen Bronga, I apologize. Member Bronga.
No problem.
Oh, Member Myers is on.
Everybody,
That is all I see for members. Do you want me to go through staff?
oh, I don't think so. Just
I see Cameron Presverdi might be on.
remember, Renita, you there?
No.
No.
I'm sorry, did you say you wanted me to go through staff?
No, I said no.
Okay.
Okay, so today we are convened to go through line by line the proposed budget amendments that have been submitted to Assembly's financial team. And we have, I believe, 42 amendments or so. Desiree Camacho, our financial analyst, has done a good job of putting them into a packet. So, but with that many items and with 2 hours scheduled to meet, that means we have to limit the amount of time per amendment for the discussion. And so I'm not great at math, but if we have 44 into a 90-minute meeting, I think we get about 2 minutes per amendment. And so I am going to actually keep time because I want to make sure we get through all of this today, because our calendar is at this time so backed up with so much going on, and this being the budget season and the meeting on the 21st. So folks are going to be asked to be real pithy and to the point with their amendments and describing them and questions. If the time is exceeded for questions relating to a specific amendment, the plan is to hold that one for another conversation at the end of the meeting if there's time, because I anticipate some amendments won't take the full 2 minutes and some will. And so if there are ones that we need to have more discussion beyond the 2 minutes, we will roll back to them, and I'll be keeping tabs. And Desiree, hopefully you can help me keep tabs on those that we need to come back to. So raising your hand is going to be an effective way for me to see if you're in the queue, but if you aren't, I believe the clerk said it, so chat is not functioning. It's muted, I think, or no, it is functioning. So, and I would note Miss Alto put in the chat that Mr. Martinez is here now. So put yourself in the chat to ask to get into the queue if you want to make a comment. That's the easiest way. I think Mr. Myers is a guest. You might not be able to, so you'll just text me. And Otherwise, put on your seatbelts. It's a snowy, bumpy road out there, and we're going to get through this work in the next 2 hours. So with that said, Ms. Camacho, anything you want to begin the conversation with?
I emailed you all 2 versions of the same information. One is in a PowerPoint format. I put it together this morning because I thought we were going to be in City Hall, so forgive me if there's any formatting issues. And then the second is our standard packet version. And yeah, there's a lot of amendments. We're at 44, and I think we can do it. We can do it.
All right, so let's dive in. Do you want to take control of the screen, Desiree?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. All right, next. So, Ms. Brawley.
Oh, good. Okay. So I'll keep this brief. This amendment is a recurring $100,000 dollar addition to the planning department. I don't know if it would sit in current or long range, but it is essentially to give funding for communications and educational material of development code changes. So Title 21, potentially Title 23, although I know that's a different department, really thinking about educating the public. This was something that came out of the Housing Summit last Friday. People mentioned, including our fellow member Bronga, was describing the challenge of really understanding what these code changes mean, especially if you want to do things like build an ADU. Future code changes that we're contemplating would also be relevant there. So really just thinking about ways to get that out to the public. So we've talked about having a comms position for the planning department, but this is really more focused on producing materials and then potentially, working on videos or other formats. That's the idea.
All right, anyone wish to comment on that or have a question? Just put yourself in the queue. I'm not hearing anyone, so good on time. Next. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. This is also an outcome from the summit. It's also $100,000. It's listed as one time. It's essentially building on the really great energy and momentum and our staff's ability to put on awesome events. And so this would be contemplating one or more events in 2024. It doesn't need to look the same as it did this year, but this year we had a retreat and a summit, as well as some communications work around the work that we're doing. So for example, we could hold another summit next fall and talk about housing. We could also talk about transportation, small business growth, any other ideas like that. And so it would, as it mentions, it could include funding for a venue, logistics, support contractors. And so that 100,000 is really a total that we could use in different ways.
Anyone wish to ask a question? Ms. Alto, I see your hands raised, but please, instead of raising the hand, let's put in the queue in the chat. Just put me in the queues because sometimes I won't see those hands. Go ahead, Ms. Alto.
Sure. I just want to clarify or ensure this is for any policy priorities, not just related to housing, if that is the intent, or because you're saying it came out of the Housing Action Summit, but what I'm picking up here is it could be extrapolated to any assembly-based priority where community convening really is an essential part of that work.
Yes. Yeah. So I say it comes out of the summit because I think there was so much positive feedback and people felt like it went really well. And so, but it's not intended to be limited to housing.
Any other questions on this item? I'm not hearing any, so we will go ahead and move on to the next one. So this one is Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment is somewhat similar to a couple other amendments in the packet today. And this one specifically focuses in on housing action. As you all know, we really needed the extra funding support to be able to put on the Housing Summit and to do a lot of really great work during Housing Action Week. So this is really a continuation of a lot of that kind of work, but really focusing on a broader scope. So yes, the media and logistics support, but also any kind of research, legal drafting we may need, and specific project-based needs. For example, we are going to be looking at tracking a lot of data to make sure that we are meeting our housing targets. we are taxing our current staff to the max right now, I would say. So if we want to continue to do this kind of work in a data enriched way, then I think we do need extra contractual support. So that's what this bucket of money helps to do.
Any questions or comments? I see Mr. Bond.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say I could not support this more. I think this is very much needed for a couple of reasons. Number one,
Mr. Vaughn, I'm going to ask you to hold on kind of the whys we can do on the floor. It's clarifying
okay,
questions.
yes.
Thanks. Sorry to be a
Nope, that's
taskmaster.
good. Nope,
All right.
that's good.
Thanks. Ms. Zalatal.
Thank you. So, Mr. Rivera, why recurring if it's limited to housing, or do you have a vision that it's recurring until, we just move past this piece? I just want to know a little bit more about how,
Yeah.
and is the idea to right size it after maybe the first year, like if we spend all 150,000, or if we don't? I guess I just need a little bit more context.
Sure, thanks. So the intent here is that this is a recurring pot of money that we have for as long as housing is a priority for the legislative branch, which I can imagine it being a priority for the next several years, that we're going to need to continue to have this contractual support.
Timing is up. So do we need to continue having the discussion about this item after, or are you good? Okay, let's move forward. Sorry to cut in, but we got time. Next one. Mr. Rivera, Mr. Martinez.
All right, so I will try to be quick with this one. So this is $3 million as one-time funds for now. And essentially what it does is in the real estate department, it creates a housing fund to do a variety of different things as described in the amendment. Because of time, I'm not going to read everything. And it also adds some specific criteria that I think really falls in line with some of the key levers that we're looking at, increasing density, making sure we're building more units. So it adds, I think, a couple of great layers for the real estate department. And essentially, it's this fund that will go out to RFP, and developers who are specifically focused on affordable housing development per HUD standards are able to apply through a competitive process for these funds. I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you. I have Ms. Brawley, the question.
Yeah, two questions. One, what's the fund source proposed?
Thanks. It's tax capacity. Yeah, it's on the next page.
Oh, thank you. Okay. And then it says that it would be approval by the assembly, but just to clarify, it looks like the real estate department would run that process, right?
Yes,
The RFP
correct.
process.
So that's yes, they would run it, and then any awards through the RFP process would need to be approved by the assembly.
Okay, thanks.
So, and just on a matter of process, if you have questions or thoughts that you believe or that come up later on any of these specific items, the request would be that you put your questions in writing to Desiree, who can share the question to all members so we can all be looped in on the questions people are concerned about. So with that, next item, please.
Wait, I was in the queue.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you
Twice.
jump in there. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
So we're out of time on this item, but go ahead quick.
So I want to do like a point of order. Really rushing through these at 2 minutes isn't going to provide me the kind of context and information I can do to digest them. I think some of them are going to not take as long. And so I don't know how we can kind of balance that a
What we can
bit.
do, you just tell me that you want more time on this item, and when we get through all of them, we'll come back to the ones that are identified for needing more time.
Okay, I need more time on this item.
Okay, so we'll come back to this one, and I understand it's a large item. So, but I just want to make sure everybody gets some time for their items today. So that's the way we decided to go with it. So, but Desiree, we'll mark this one to come back to. Next item. This one, Ms. Braga. You're on mute.
I think I'm off mute now. So I'm sorry, I can't even see this because I can only get in Teams on my phone. Amendment reverses the proposed 367, 465 one-time savings due to vacant positions of PNR. I didn't think I put that in. I'm sorry. I don't know who did that.
That's fine. So Desiree, we can maybe remove Ms. Bronga, leave the item for discussion for later. Anyone want to track on this one?
I may ask Desiree, so that's not my park increases in payment, or is it? And if so, I apologize for being so ignorant.
So you asked to reverse any cuts to parks in general, and then you asked for a number of budget CIB amendments, which are at the end of the packet.
Okay, so I strongly feel that Parks and Rec has dramatically had an increase in their workload, and that cutting their budget is not appropriate. And so that is why this is in. And I thank you for getting me straight, Desiree.
All right, thank you. So again, in the chat, probably best not to put tons of comments. But one is from Mr. Ballin that he's going to review them independently, which all members are expected to do that. And then separately, Ms. Bronco says maybe say slide number as well as amendment number for people who are trying to track. And all of that is reasonable. So next one.
Okay, Zalatel Brawley amendment number 6 is to basically reduce the labor scrub that's in the budget across all departments at $2.6 million. I believe Ms. Brawley and I just didn't agree with the rationale provided during the work sessions, that it was truly a labor scrub, or as Mr. Martinez said, kind of betting against ourselves. So that's what this amendment does. It takes it across all departments where there was that quote labor savings.
I'm not sure what slide number that is, but it's Zalatel Brawley amendment number 6. So any questions on that one? So you may just bought yourself a minute and a half when we get to the end. So next item, please. Go ahead, Ms. Zalatel, Ms. Brawley.
Zalatel amendment number 7 is $750,000. This is comes out of our conversation at the First Transportation Committee, where we learned about mission critical pay for DOT to use for snow removal. This would create an equivalent of mission critical pay for our maintenance and operation heavy equipment operators. My understanding is there's quite a delta between the amount of equipment we have and the number of operators we have to operate it. And so I believe we have 30 pieces of heavy equipment and 18 operators. On a day like today, we would like to get all equipment on the road, and that means having adequate opportunity for staff. And it describes how the mechanism of how this could be implemented in the text here.
All right, any questions for Ms. Zalatel or Ms. Brawley? Okay, not hearing any, so we'll move on to the next one. Thank you. Go ahead.
So amendment number 8 is a $175,000. Basically, it's a reversal of a cut in property appraisal. So property appraisal during the work session said that they would have to keep a position vacant, and they were asked to do so to make up for the amount of money that they would have to be spending for depreciation of the CAMA platform. This position in particular is a customer service position, kind of front line of property tax appraisal. And so this reversal of that would allow that position to get filled in the new year. And it was not a part of the overall labor savings. It was a separate mechanism. That is why this one stands alone.
Any questions? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to the next item. I would also note again, please let's limit our content in the chat. I would ask that it's mostly just asking to be in the queue, as the chat is not part of the record. Anything you put in the chat, please say on the record. So next item.
Yes, Chair, thank you. This amendment is really focuses on providing the Assembly with an opportunity for a comprehensive workforce study to better understand both the needs with respect to our workforce in terms of recruitment and retention, but also with respect to legislative action and policies that drive better working conditions and environmental conditions for our employees and their families.
All right, any questions? So I know also that HR has been asking for funds for a wage and labor study. So it might be something that we see about something similar. Mrs. Allen.
Yeah, well, just to be clear, we see this as more extensive than just a wage and a wage study. We see this as kind of all encompassing and very deep dive.
Mrs. Zalata.
Yep. Does it show the fund source? I know I'm a part of this amendment, but it's not showing up on the screen. There we go. If we can just make sure we move through both. So this is taxing capacity. Thank you.
Any other questions on this? Let's move on to the next one. I think this is item number 10. Go ahead, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Salt.
Yeah, thank you. So the Girdwood EMS budget has been flat funded, I think, since 2021, during which time some number of costs have gone up. The most significant one we're looking here is labor costs. A big piece of that is an increase in healthcare costs. They're a small nonprofit. I will tell you, as former president of Girdwood Fire, those costs can fluctuate rapidly or dramatically depending on whether or not they're claims, because you only have 4 employees. The other thing they're doing is they're trying to achieve an NFPA standard of 6 personnel per shift, which is a mix of volunteers and paid staff. Specifically, they want to increase the number of paid staff. And with that, you know, what you find, if you're able to have adequate personnel, it allows them to provide ALS services 24 hours a day, which is a goal. And we've seen the benefits this recently. Just in the last few months, they've saved 3 individuals who had cardiac arrest events, which is pretty amazing. So that's what they're hoping to maintain with this increase in funding, because with the flat funding, realistically, they'll run out of money in 2024 if we don't bump it up. And then there's a little extra money in there for replacing some mud rescue tools, increased fuel costs, the increased cost of maintaining compliance with the controlled substance program, things of that nature.
Are there any questions for the sponsors? No. Okay, thank you. Let's move to the next one.
Okay, me again. So I think the language in this is pretty straightforward. In 2022, we got a $10 million grant to be dispersed over 3 years. And the explicit intent of that grant was to fund 18 new additional firefighter positions. However, since 2022, we have not added any firefighter PCNs to AFD. As I understand, this money is being deployed elsewhere, but the reality is we can't increase the staffing without at least putting the PCNs in there first. Sorry, my dog's barking. So this would, allow AFD to have the flexibility to where if they have the funding, they can start to fill those positions, which will get them also closer to the NFPA standard of 4 personnel per apparatus. Right now, the reality is the AFD's staffing models, the staffing does not meet their deployment models, and so it's been a struggle for the department.
Anyone in the queue for this one? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. Thank you all. We're gonna get through these at this rate. Next one.
Okay, so yeah, me again. So APDEA recently ratified a contract that would include a 7.3% wage increase for 2024. And we expect, once that gets through the process, that should be coming before the Assembly for action here in the next couple months. Basically, this amendment just creates the funding they would need to actually achieve that goal of a 7.3% wage increase for 2024. And suffice to say, there is a critical need to recruit and retain at APD. My numbers are sitting on my desk in the office, but they're down around 50 officers. They have another 50 or so eligible to retire next year, and they're only bringing on about 25 new officers per year through the academies. And that's just because they don't have enough applicants. So unless we can figure out a way to kind of start to reverse the trend, a bad situation is going to get pretty dire here soon.
Oh, it's Mr. Rivera. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thanks. So I guess first question is, this is 4-year contract negotiation. So this is just year 1 of 4 of wage increases. Is that what I'm understanding, Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, again, I'm sorry on the numbers, but as I know, 7.3% is going to be the contract for 2024. I think 2025 is around 3 or 4%. 2026 is a number. Ultimately, at the end of the 4 years, it would be a total bump of around 17% in wage increase, which would put us about on par with the Alaska State Troopers, which is, currently targeting our officers.
Okay, so then this increase here still leaves us at a little bit less of a parity. It's not going to be until the end of the 4 years that we are at parity with officers. Is that correct? With the troopers, rather.
Yeah, the troopers, with their contract, it's also phased, the wage increases, and their steps are a little different from ours. They end around 20% increase. We end around 17% increase. How those match up year to year, I'd have to look at the numbers, but, they kind of moving in step. And encouragingly, I heard from APDA that knowing that this contract is likely to go forward has already had a pretty significant effect on morale. And some individuals who are planning on retiring next year, have stated they intend to stick around if this goes through.
So there's a bunch of people in the queue, and this one, like the previous one for fire, is one that's going to have significant conversation. So I'm putting a star on this one. We'll come back to it for members who have questions. So we'll address these in more detail after we get through just the first round. So thank you for your patience, everybody. Next item.
Okay, Zalatil Amendment number 13. This moves the mobile crisis team out of the alcohol tax. Really, the intent here is to operationalize the mobile crisis team. The mobile crisis team, which is a wonderful service, doesn't exist anywhere in our municipality except for in an alcohol tax budget line. So the intention here is to move it into the emergency services division budget detail of AFD. This is for a couple of reasons. One, it puts it with the other critical emergency services. 2, it is supposed to work when it's 24/7 to Medicaid reimbursement. This is already an area in which Medicaid reimbursement is being received. And 3, I think it puts in a better position for bargaining for IAFF, which has still not happened to date. So really says that mobile crisis is going to stay around, and it's an essential emergency service.
Right, Mr. Salt. Or wait, Ms. Brawley first. Go ahead. Sorry, Ms. Brawley.
Thank you. I just, I would like to be added as a co-sponsor on this amendment. I think we missed it in the paperwork. And also
That's
while we're
correct.
at it, number 7, the M&O for snow plowing. That's all. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Salt.
Thanks. I'm just curious. So this puts money back under the tax cap. What are we doing with the roughly 2.4 room that'll be created in the alcohol tax? Is that being used for anything?
I think we'll probably see some amendments that might use some of that alcohol taxing capacity. And notice it's here, it's taxing capacity TBD. I need to meet with some folks in finance, but I actually think there might be another way that effectuates one of our assembly priorities around fire revenues that may be able to cover this without necessarily taking it out of the taxing capacity.
Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Vaughn, if it's quick, if not, we'll come back to this one.
Okay.
But you
I'd also
can.
like to be a co-sponsor. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Okay, anyone else? No, let's move to the next one. Ms. Salto.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see the numbers shift. It just was so seamless. This does the same thing, but is using taxing capacity for mobile intervention team, taking out the alcohol tax. It's something that should be around to stay, really operationalizes it within the budget, and actually moves it to where we are fully funded at 24/7 operations. So last year was partial funding to start to move towards 24/7. Those clinicians have been brought on, but to bring full 24/7, it needs to be funded at this amount and should be a part of a PD's budget.
Right, any questions on this one? I'm not hearing any. So
Ms. Bronga.
Oh, there you go. Ms. Bronga, go ahead.
can you quickly describe the difference in how the mobile crisis team and the mobile intervention are getting funded? I got lost a little bit.
Sure. So both were originally, mobile intervention team was split between alcohol tax and general government because part of general government preceded the creation of the alcohol tax. What we propose to do with both is take both of them, any alcohol tax funding, out of their operations and put them in their department budgets, to really operationalize them, since the alcohol tax seems to change more frequently.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next one. Ms. Frawley.
Yeah, I can cover this. So this is following up again on the discussions about our plans and implementing plans. As we know, the long range planning division is down staff. We also know that there's a vacancy that they still need to fill. So this proposes adding a new position, but funding it at the half year, essentially giving time to fill that other position and knowing it'll take some time anyway. And then really focused on a senior level position that's focused on plan implementation and really working at a high level. So it's a senior position.
All right. Ms. Braga.
So if you can't fill the other one, I'm not sure how this, makes sense to add another position
All
to
right.
get filled.
I'm gonna suggest that again gets to the point of debate and not to the point of asking questions about the content and what it means. So we aren't here to debate the merits of any of these amendments at this time. Really, it's just to ask questions, to get clarity, to understand when we get to the point where we're debating items, then those kind of questions will be germane.
Can I ask is there some sort of incentive to fill this position? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here. So to take into account the concern, this is set to fill at the half year. So it's not to put two positions in competition, but, fill the one that they're currently advertising for now, and then at the half year, and is connected with some of the work around that pro application and some of the other zoning work.
Thank you. That was a great way to put a question that doesn't get to debate. Anyone else? Okay, very good. Thanks. Let's go to the next one. Go ahead.
Thank you. So this is a Vision Zero coordinator. Again, at the half year, we asked last year in our legislative program, and I hope to include it again this year in our legislative program, but it didn't work. We haven't been getting this funding for the state. It really goes to making our roads safer and reducing pedestrian deaths. I've been doing a lot of work in this area around the Highway Safety Improvement Plan and be able to create urban safety corridors, but that's a 5-year trajectory with DOT. This is an intermediate step that can happen. I have talked with the traffic department about this. They believe this is an appropriate intermediate step. And so this would move that forward because we continue to see pedestrian deaths, particularly on high speed roads. Thank you. And it
All
does
right.
taxing capacity.
Mr. Volland.
Thanks. So I have two questions on this one. Number one, have we talked with planning about whether this fits into their department? And then is it, I guess, are they the most appropriate, or should it be within the traffic department?
That's an error. That's just a carryover from the last slide. I think it should be traffic. Yes.
Okay, great. And then go ahead and add me as a co-sponsor for this one too. Thanks.
Anyone else? Nope. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Go ahead.
Okay, so this amendment funds a new route, Transit on the Move Priority Route number 4, as a 30-minute route from, it goes from Muldoon, basically Muldoon Road into Barr Road, winds through Muldoon a little bit, gets on 36, and then hits the neighborhood health center, and then goes to the airport. These funds are the local match funds that we need, both from a operating and a capital side. And then public transit is looking at various funding sources for the federal part of the funds. They don't yet have those funds in hand. So if they don't get those funds, then we won't be bringing this amendment forward, but if they do get those funds, then we will. That's it.
Ms. Saltel, oh wait, I'm sorry, Ms. Brawley first.
Yeah, just briefly, I know there's a lag between if this is funded and then when it would actually start running. Can you just speak to that briefly?
Yeah, so the timeline that the public transit department gave me is that if we funded this in November and they were able to start the work, then it wouldn't be until about August that the line would turn on, which is pretty normal. It takes a while.
Okay, thanks.
And now Ms. Saltel.
Thanks. That led right into my question, which is this recurring funding? It says one time and recurring for 3 years, but is it prorated to that August start time or whenever the funds would be needed in order to turn it on for 24? Or are we appropriating funds forward beyond just 24?
Thanks. I would need to get back to you. These are just the numbers that I know public transit gave me, but I'll get back to you on that specific question.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions on this? Perfect timing. That was 2 minutes. Let's get to the next one. Ms. Braga.
So this is an amendment that would put Anchorage Youth Court directly within the police budget instead of it as a grant, instead of it coming through the mayor's community grants. They had put in for 120,000 and had only received 300 or 3,000. And this would be in the Anchorage Police Department's Youth Engagement and Diversion Program. And I just see that this makes total sense. So there is guaranteed funding source rather than each year wondering what you're going to get.
So my only question on this one is APD is looped in?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Youth Court is ecstatic.
Anyone else? Okay, perfect. Let's move on.
So this amendment is to the library, and it does two things. Part of it is continues the funding of the Anchorage Public Library Foundation Coordinator, which has been a necessary position to coordinate between the efforts of the library and the foundation so that they can continue successfully fundraising for capital projects. The second part of this amendment seeks to fund an increase in the usage of Hoopla, which is an online media streaming platform that is very popular. So in order to make sure that everyone gets to use it, they need an increase because it's a per usage charge that Hoopla charges the municipality.
Ms. Braga.
So I just thought we just bumped money to Hoopla the other night. And so this is up above that.
Yes and yes. So yes, we did fund 80,000, but the library needs more than 80,000 to meet the demand. It's just a really high demand.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Let's move on to the next one. All right, the next one is mine. It's a $75,000 increment for training for the Human Resources Department to provide trainings across the municipality. The conversation came out of the drug testing policy update conversation. It could include training related to substance use disorders and other items, but it's really more broadly to allow the HR director to have a budget for training across the departments. Ms. Zalato.
I see that, but it's one time. Is this a budget that would be necessary on a recurring basis?
It could be for sure. He asked for it one time, and so I just responded to the request, and he asked for it in response to the drug testing AO because I think he realized there's a lack of that training feedback loop that's going out, and so he and I discussed some other more long-term conversations, as I had mentioned, the annual study or the every 3-year study of salaries and some other things that might come forward in a more comprehensive approach, but I didn't want to do that without him. And so this was simply in response to one specific conversation.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Next one.
Okay, so this one is to the FCC. It's an amendment that increases the annual appropriation so that they can recruit a new executive director and maintain adequate staffing to support community council's work.
All right, any questions? Thank you. Let's move to the next one.
Chris, you want to do this one?
Sure. So this one is the annual Assembly Branch kind of unified request. It has a handful of items: labor adjustments, a full-time position to support the licensing clerk to deal with increased licenses, half a year of a new full-time employee attorney. We're in discussions about recruiting. We spend enough on contract attorneys that it argues to bring it home. Additionally, the next one would be the continued contract services that we have for council. Then this probably is the most important item in here. The person who's in charge of recording and broadcasting our meetings is retiring, and our cameras continue to be archaic, the best technology 1994 had to offer. And so this is the study that is the project that's being studied right now to upgrade our whole system, our archiving and production, and help us to modernize and be prepared for when Mr. Crab retires. Finally, funding for elections that are coming up this year. Is that Mr. Johnson? You're muted.
Member Brawley was first.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. Just, this is a facetious question. Are we going to be streaming in HD?
Right. We aren't streaming yet in a capacity that the news media can use. And so once we get to a modern system, they'll be able to use direct feed from our system. Go back
Okay,
into the media room and look at the TV. That's the quality that we have. It will
Okay,
blow
thank
your
you.
mind. And now, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, for the $350,000 for the elections, is this due to increasing costs in the operating elections?
no,
I mean, I
it's
would
the
assume that
likely-
we already budget for that.
This is a year that is likely to have an extra election in it, which is the runoff election for the mayoral race. And so it's just preparing for the runoff. And if we don't have a runoff, then we don't have to spend that money, but we should be prepared because most years we have a mayoral race, we have a runoff. All right. Anyone else? Next.
So next is Mr. Cross.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Camacho. Mr. Cross, we have one that's not in the packet. You'll receive it shortly. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so I had an increase in general budget, and it was a under the tax authority tax cap, which would be $400,000 for an update on the Eagle River Chuyak Comprehensive Plan, last updated in 2006, which went mostly unchanged since 1998. This is just to get Eagle River community councils and ours more involved in some of the housing challenges we have, which they just getting roadblocked, claiming we need to update our comp plan. So.
Ms. Zalatil.
Thank you. Mr. Cross, are the folks who would effectuate this in the community ready to spend $400,000 worth of money all next year? Or is that an all-in cost over multiple years?
That is an all-in cost. I talked to Debbie Osiander and I talked to several individuals out here, Crystal Kennedy, saying how much do you anticipate? They said the total cost would be $400,000, which they anticipated would take about 2 years. I would like to see that obviously happen much faster. But my understanding, that was the all-in cost.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Bond.
Thank you. I'm wondering if before this comes before us, if we could have some type of memo on how much of the 2006 update has actually been implemented. Because if we're talking about paying for another plan update, I want to know, what do we do with the last plan?
And I think a fair question also would be, is there any communication from those folks in writing for us that tells us they want this? Not that we don't believe you, Kevin, but it'd be helpful to have that shared.
I can send an email out to all the community councils, get them to quickly draft a resolution. It has been supported before, and I know in the past they've done resolutions, just nothing's moved forward, but
I don't think a resolution is needed.
We can go into further just out of interest of time, but what's happened out here is not what went with the comp plan, because development went a different direction when the comp plan anticipated, didn't go heading north, it went west, and so it's not really relevant.
Kevin, I don't think a resolution is necessary in the time we have, but some form of communication. So, okay, and do we want to come back to this one? Are we good? We're good. Okay, next item. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, sure. This one is related to emergency cold weather shelter. And it proposes providing funding for the cost of monthly transit passes for folks staying at shelter. It lists the cost of that pass. And it could also be utilized for things like on-demand transportation, which just means, for example, a cab ride or an Uber ride if you have to get somewhere and you can't easily take the bus.
Okay, no questions. Thank you. Next item, number 24, Mr. Rivera.
Actually, I think Randy got in the queue sort of late.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Yeah.
Schultz, go ahead.
No worries. So Ms. Brawley, so how, I don't know, how will you monitor this, or is there plans to monitor this? I guess if someone's in the shelter, then not in the shelter, is this like a monthly bus pass that are due monthly, or do you give it annually over the winter, or that winter period?
I think we were contemplating monthly passes, and I think there's like a physical version you can get, but that was something we would need to work with People Mover on. And
Okay.
the idea is simply that it helps people get out of shelter if they can access other places.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. Now we can go to the next item.
So this amendment seeks to continue the funding for emergency cold weather shelter from January through April of next year. We've already appropriated $5.1 million. This is an additional $2 million through tax capacity that covers pretty much everything except for Covenant House. We have Covenant House in a separate amendment. Thanks.
So a question for you, the 5.1 million is in the 2024 budget?
The 5.1 is what we have already appropriated to date.
Right, and okay, so, but that was really through January, right, or through December?
If I can add.
Yep.
At least, I don't remember the exact amount, but at least 2 million of that was ARPA funding, and that one does not end with December 31st, so it can carry over into next year.
Okay, so I guess the gist of my question is the budget does not already contain funding identified specifically to fulfill the requirements for cold weather shelter for 2024. And this is to make sure there's enough money.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. What's in the budget
Yes.
already is what is alcohol tax funding that isn't specifically for this. Or I should say some of it is, but not much.
But not sufficient.
So I guess just to wrap the bow on this, so the mayor's housing and homelessness coordinator stated fairly early on in the process that she projects a budget of about 7.8 or so million that we would need for emergency cold weather shelter. So this gets us most of the way there.
Right. So they know of costs, but they didn't put it in their budget, and we are adding it to make sure their budget adds up to the costs that they've already told us. I just want to make sure I'm tracking. Is that a correct statement?
It is correct that the administration did not put in emergency cold weather shelter funds in their budget, correct?
And they did brief us that it was necessary. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. We can move on. Mr. Rivera.
Thanks. So this amendment is the other part of emergency cold weather shelter funding specifically for Covenant House. And this is through alcohol tax.
Any questions? Ms. Barley, is that a question?
Yeah, I was just going to add on. So we passed a resolution funding Covenant House through with $400,000 total, and that was for this year and next year. So this is the funding for that next year piece.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Nope. Okay, let's move to the next one. Number 26. Mr.
Thank you. So this amendment seeks to fund some of the recommendations from the Allowed Camp Community Task Force final report. Essentially, what it does is funds through the Anchorage Health Department and Parks and Rec Department up to 2 to 3 allowed campsites. It lays out sort of a process for the Health Department and Parks and Rec to report back to us by March 1st of next year of the plans for any possible allowed camps that might be stood up. And then, of course, as we know, emergency cold weather shelter ends at the end of April. So they would have to work quickly to stand any possible allowed camps up. And it also references a few other policy recommendations just to make sure that this is run in a way that's integrated with the HPRS and not run as a siloed kind of effort. Thanks.
All right. Okay, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, question on this one. I see the funding goes to 2 different departments. That makes sense. Is this contemplated to be run by the city, or would this be contemplated to be more of like a contract to a private operator?
Thanks. So my contemplation would be that it would be run by contractors, but the money would need to be funneled through municipal departments. And there might be some things that like Parks and Rec would have their staff do similar to what Parks and Rec is doing right now at various encampments. So it might be a little mix of both for Parks and Rec, but certainly for the health department, it would be contractors.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Bronga.
So I'm thinking that this number is not large enough to cover it, but wondering, is this maybe going to include the pallet shelters? Or are you just thinking this is no funding for that kind of shelter?
Thanks. So certainly whatever the form takes, whether it is the form of a pallet shelter, what I am envisioning though is not really spending too much on capital with these funds, because that would eat up a lot. This is really, if we can get capital donated to us for pallet shelters, then that's great. That'll go on top of this, but I'm not envisioning this for capital.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next item.
So this is the alcohol tax increase. So there's already a budget sub-bucket for substance misuse and mental health that Mr. Boland and I worked to create last year. This adds $100,000, and it is to fund a grant opportunity for mobile case management specific to the needs of people with mental health and substance misuse disorders or co-occurring mental health and substance misuse disorders. Really a nice complement to the mobile intervention and the mobile crisis teams, and helps us work toward that proportionality in that sub bucket, because it had been blended into homelessness for so long, and so sub bucketing it out and really building up that funding available. So that is the recurring portion is about the increase to the bucket, and then trying this as an approach for that, and then seeing where we land for next year.
All right, Mr. Bond.
Thank you. Yes, again, as Meg said, directly responsive to the recommendations of that task force. And we did hear from some of the participants like Mountain View Health Clinic, for instance, and others, that what is currently lacking is sort of a healthcare oriented, boots on the ground, going to people where they are, that mobile approach. So that's kind of what this is intended to get at. Thanks.
One quick last thing, if I may, it's also intended to see if it can leverage Medicaid and see what the cost defrayment is.
So a question, I don't think I see, was there or is there going to be an amendment requesting money to do a financial analysis of the complex behavioral health needs recommendations? Because, you know, there was a lot there. Did anyone, because this is maybe a part of that. We don't know what we need. Did anyone pull that forward? Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, I can just give some context, not about this amendment per se, but we've been looking at that task force, what goes in the legislative program. Member Rivera and I met with the Mental Health Trust staff to talk about priorities. So I think that there is work being done, and I think the answer is a lot of it is not necessarily things the city can fund directly, but we're working on it.
Okay, so there's not, though, an amendment that performs financial analysis of the expenses of the proposed findings and proposals of the complex behavioral health task force report. Because if there isn't, we should put that forward at some point. Mr. Bond.
Thank you. I agree with you, Chair. I think one thing to acknowledge about this specific amendment is that there are community partners that are already doing this work, but it's very difficult and it's sort of a broken business model. So if we can augment the work that's already been doing, I think that'd be valuable. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next one, I guess. Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Thanks. So this amendment seeks to increase funding the direct grants that are currently in the alcohol tax for Awake Star and Victims for Justice by 100,000 each for a total of 300,000. And it envisions using some alcohol tax fund balance / any additional funds that we may get from alcohol tax. So it doesn't envision cutting any of the particular budget items, and it also envisions it as recurring. As folks saw, we did get several emails from Awake asking for this increase so that they can more effectively do their work. And I think as a whole, we have talked a lot about making sure that our funding for the alcohol tax is balanced among the different buckets. And so I think this helps achieve that a bit. Thanks.
Mr. Bond? No. Okay, that just popped in. Okay, no questions. Then let's proceed to the next one.
This is one-time funding for APD for training. We've been doing this kind of on a one-by-one basis to provide training to APD. We've done implicit bias training and a number of things. I like keeping it as a one-time where there's room in the alcohol tax. We do have very little in the first responders bucket with the potential removal of mobile crisis team and mobile intervention team. And I like that with the kind of focus of the alcohol tax, it is nice that we get some metrics back from APD on the training that they are doing.
Right.
And this was done in conjunction with APD.
Great. Any questions? No. Okay, let's move to the next one.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I was late there.
Yeah.
Should this one be recurring? Because I think we've funded these trainings in the past too.
Right now, I've left it as something always above and beyond what APD's already training, and that's why it's always one time and it's alcohol tax, and I think that's just cleaner. I think we could have that conversation, but I've been enjoying the one time because we get very much more of a specific proposal about the type of training they're looking at for the year.
Exactly. Thanks. I agree. It creates a framework that we have some input. Next item.
Okay, this one isn't much different than I think a previous one we saw, which was additional help in the legislative branch around policy development, really around housing. This really came at the request of legislative services. So I think there's the opportunity to possibly marry this with some other efforts.
Same. Ms. Baronga.
Oh, mine was on the previous. Could I ask that still?
Hold on. Is there anything on this one? Any questions? If there's no questions on this one, we can go back to the previous question for a minute.
So it sounds like this APD training one is to train them, the officers, but could the money also be used to train or to showcase to the public about the body-worn cameras, training in that way, showing the public or not?
This is really targeted to every year a specific need APD has around training. So it could cover some of their training with regard to body-worn cameras and maybe how they want to communicate with the public about the fact that they're wearing body-worn cameras. Last year's training was implicit bias training, and it was, I got to sit in on some of it. It was really good. So it's always just really targeted because remember, alcohol tax requires a metric. So there has to be some kind of metric that APD can report to us to show the effectiveness of whatever they've done.
Thank you.
And I think it would be fair to ask the chief if they have a budget for outreach on that very specific topic separately, because it could be that they already have a plan for that. It would be wise to understand what their approach is. So next item, next item, I guess. Ms. Alto.
So this is a one-time increase to the Anchorage Health Department budget for purposes of the Anchorage Safety Center. We've had very clear communications that the Safety Center contract is going to increase. This may not be the full increase for 2024, but it certainly puts us in a position to put out an RFP for the types of services that we want to see. I believe Miss Bronga was intending to be on this one with me. So sorry, I didn't catch that. But that's what it is to help with that transition and that higher quality, more reliable service.
Meg, is there any universe in which these services could be Medicaid billable?
Yeah, I think so, under the 1115 waiver. And I think that should be explored over time. And I think that it will just depend on the model in which we're going to move forward with. I think moving from a security company to a different type of company will probably be the linchpin in that, about
Yeah,
who's eligible to build Medicaid.
Right. So as we look toward conversations about the permanent contract for these services, we should be engaging in the question of how could Medicaid be billed? What's her name? That woman, maybe we call her back up. Stephanie, what was her name?
Stephanie Colson.
Colston.
Yeah.
Colston.
Colston. Yeah.
Anyhow, so I think if we could turn this into a source of billable services, we could get past this fear of constant escalation. So thank you. Next.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I had a
Ms.
question.
Brawley.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Brawley, go ahead on the previous item.
Yeah, I think I know the answer to this, but could you speak briefly to, so I know the Safety Center service has been in AHD's budget for a long time. This is using alcohol tax. Can you speak to how it's not in violation of the double dipping level of service issue or backfilling?
Absolutely. This would be an increase above and beyond 2019 service levels, and it doesn't replace the money that was already in the budget. It's an additional amount. It's not supplanting.
Yeah, that's an interesting question and one that might need to be explored further. Thank you. Next item. Ms. Alto.
So this is a Plan B amendment. So we already appropriated this money to the Anchorage Children's Trust. However, that contract may not be executed before year end. And if it wasn't, those funds would typically go into fund balance. This just says these funds originally appropriated in 2023 313S. If it hasn't been distributed, will carry over into 24 to effectuate that funding. Just to remind you all, this was 2021 fund balance, or sorry, 2022 fund balance that wasn't spent, hasn't gotten out the door in 23. So there's definitely a mechanism to ensure it will get out in 24.
Do you have a question for this, Ms. Brawley, or was that the previous item?
Previous.
Okay, any questions, anyone? Nope, okay, let's move to the next one. Ms. Bronga.
So this is something that was inspired by Member Voland, but and I was initially not too excited about putting money into Mountain View parks, especially Davis Park, with the homeless presence there, and wondering if it would even be worthwhile. But I met with the community council president in Mountain View, and he was so accommodating. Their mindset is not, let's get these people out of here, but they are drowning with the amount of homelessness in their park. And so these could be safety upgrades like lighting. There is on the master plan for skate park, maybe a pump track. And it would be nice to put something in that community that addresses that they have been going through a lot and do this park improvement for Davis Park. Possibly fencing could come from this for around that snow dump area. But I'm thinking lighting would be another big improvement to Davis Park.
So just for folks' reference, Desiree put in the chat that the chart is incorrect. It has the 450, not the 300 as listed. And then also Ms. Brawley made a comment in the chat that is just so folks know we've moved from the general government budget to the capital budget conversation. And so Ms. Altel.
Thank you. Just like with Mr. Cross's other amendment, it would be really good to get something from the community council or a letter saying that they would like this to proceed because it's adding a new project and it wouldn't necessarily have been on their capital improvement program. So that we know that that's where it's coming from. And then might be a question for Desiree or maybe for Ms. Bronga. Would it be additional bonding? The intention would be to bond for this project.
Yes.
To add to, and it would be to add $300,000 to the Parks and Rec bond.
Exactly. And
okay.
Just FYI, Member Voland is doing the same thing, but with more money. So we'll see this further on. I didn't feel comfortable adding more, but
so
anyway.
Okay, we'll move on. Time is up on this one. Next item. Mr. Voland.
Okay, yeah, I will have the clerk circulate Mountain View's capital improvement request. Davis Park is their #1 priority. And I think this is an example of, as we've discussed, sometimes the capital improvement list that we have isn't always like efficiently responsive to changes in priorities over time. And some, projects get repeated that the community no longer cares about, etc. As Member Bronga expressed, the community really does want some safety enhancements, better lighting. I certainly haven't discussed anything about a fence around the snow dump with my constituents. I think primarily what this should be targeted at is implementing shovel-ready projects that are already identified in the Davis Park Master Plan. With an eye to that exist, and with an eye to positively activating the space and creating more recreational opportunity and just helping people use and enjoy and love the park. I do feel like $450,000 is a more appropriate level of funding to implement some of those projects. So I'm hoping that folks will support my version of this amendment, but I do appreciate Member Bronga's sort of coming along and realizing that there is a need there. Thanks.
And as a co-sponsor on this, I will just add that there is a vicious cycle that happens in neighborhoods of poverty where we de facto allow trouble to move and then we stop investing because trouble is there. And so to me, I strongly support the higher amount because we have a duty, in my opinion, to invest in the places that we are deteriorating by our own decisions. So Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. I think this slide answers it, but for this one and the prior one, it looks like the projects being put forward are in the Davis Park Master Plan already.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just.
No fence in the Davis Park Master Plan, everything else.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then just a recommendation, because we ran into this at Turnagain Community Council last year. It is possible for councils to amend their CIP list if it's already on there. So our council moved something up to #1, and then we were able to attach that resolution. So just to say that's one option, and it's been done before.
There's another reality, though, with the CIP list that gets uploaded into the Muni system is that oftentimes councils upload and then it just disappears. And then all of a sudden, DOT or regional priorities are added to a council's priority list, and the council priority lists that are submitted to OMB are mystically not what the councils submit. And so this one, we asked for a specific communication from them on what their priorities are in answer to that problem, that their priorities weren't being added. by the system, if you will. So, all right. Anyone else? Okay, next. You're muted.
Okay, my bad, it's me again. I was trying to email the clerk to circulate that last one to you. Yeah, downtown wayfinding. So this is something that is included in a previous plan, the Anchorage Downtown Comprehensive Plan. I'd like to add this to the road improvements bond. This would be for pedestrian wayfinding. So folks who are walking around downtown, tourists, can find their way to the museum or wherever they're trying to go. This was also a focus of the mayor's task force in response to the Roger Brooks presentation. I know that the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce is really excited about having more signage downtown as well, and they're working on some things they can do. But I think this would be great. The Anchorage Parks Foundation.
I have two questions for you. Why don't we jump to that quick? Go ahead, Ms. Zalatel.
Yeah, so I understand this is supported by the Anchorage Downtown Comprehensive Plan. Is there any tie in here with the non-motorized plan, kind of citywide? And I guess, yeah, I think that's where I'm starting. And then $250,000 for wayfinding feels like a lot of money. So is there any kind of additional information you could provide for purposes of kind of what a cost breakdown looks like? Because this would mainly be signage, is what I'm understanding.
Yeah, but I think this is for sort of a comprehensive approach at signage throughout the downtown corridor. And there's folks have already worked on some design and sort of an effort to indigenize downtown as well, some indigenous inspired designs. I think that it is actually a lot of the stuff is very
So
expensive.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna back up to my question. Is there a breakdown somewhere of the cost? That was my question. And then does it tie to the road project? I'm not asking about the merits of it. I'm trying to get at the costing and what it would pay for. And is there any tie into kind of the larger municipal non-motorized plan?
And I believe the Parks Foundation does have a cost breakdown, so we just have to inquire with them.
Yeah, I think I can get that to you, and I can try to get M&O to weigh in as well. I don't currently have a correlation to the non-motorized plan that you're talking about.
So we're out of time. Ms. Brawley, if your question is quick.
I just wondered if this would include work on the Indigenous placemaking project, or if you've talked to the Park Foundation.
So that is mentioned in that Anchorage Downtown Comprehensive Plan.
And I do believe this project fits within the context of that whole effort. It's all part of that same story. Okay, next item. Mr. Mullen.
Yep, so this is one of South Addition's priorities that they've elevated, and that is to do some placemaking, some signage at the Johnny Ellis Rainbow Bridge or Park, which is kind of along C Street there. Currently, there's nothing to identify, we did the name change, but there's nothing to identify it as such. And yeah, so there's, I think Anchorage Parks Foundation is pursuing some private funding as well, but this would augment that effort. Thank you.
And just so everyone knows, it's Ann Park because it's kind of the bridge that goes over this narrow pedestrian green belt that follows the roadway. Any questions? Ms. Alto?
So I want to, just because it says add new project or change existing project, and what I'm hearing is that a lot of these were already kind of projects or ideas. And so when we're saying add new project, it means it wasn't anywhere in the CIB for any years programmed, even though it may have been your community council or neighborhood's priority, right? I just want to get clarification.
Correct. And I think South Addition is another example of where their capital improvement requests haven't been dated consistently.
Well, I'll give you a very specific example. Well, okay, go ahead, Meg.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I understand. I just, the reason I asked that question is I'm thinking about it in the context of all of these are ads, right? I guess that's the other clarification I want. They're all ads into the Parks and Rec bond.
Yes.
Okay, great. It's that intersection between what is programmed and what we might be adding, and if we're going to possibly bump. That was all I was trying to make sure I understood.
Mhm.
Just South Edition is the best example. C Street, every year, A and C couplet, somehow it gets listed to restripe to 4 lanes. And every year the community council removes restripe to 4 lanes, and every year it gets put back in there somehow as a community council priority. It's one of the most baffling things to watch. So that's a perfect example. Any other questions on this? Next, then. Ms. Bradley.
Yeah, just briefly, and this one actually is changing an existing project. It was listed for 2025. It is being moved ahead a year to 2024, and it is to purchase some equipment for the Anchorage Memorial Cemetery. And this is something that the Parks Foundation has prioritized as something to do this year.
So raise the question, of course, what kind of equipment do you know?
I would need to go back and look at the detail. I know it's something that's in the CIP and was supposed to happen next year, but it would be moved to this year. Or sorry, I guess 2 years from now to next year. But I can find that out.
Any Ms. Alvarez? No, that was the previous one. Any questions on this? Nope. Okay, let's go to the next one.
So this is for Eastchester Park, which is down near the senior center by Shiloh Baptist Park. It has been on the CIP list, and we're moving it forward. It has a plan that is ready to go. They're shovel ready to do improvements in that park area. They really would like to do like basketball, find something for teens and covered picnic area. It's an area that needs some definite love.
Agreed, and it's definitely in the master plan. Mr. Bond.
Thank you. For some reason, I thought I was going to be on this one, so please add me as a co-sponsor. And I agree, it is a high priority for Fairview.
Anyone else? Ms. Alto?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize, I thought the planning was still underway for Eastchester Park. And Chris, Mr. Constant, I'm asking kind of targeted towards you because of some things I've heard you talk about, or is that just additional ideas that were happening out of the master plan about, activating that space and some other things?
Yeah, if you give me 1 second, I can give you an update. They're almost done with the draft plan and it is about to be published. The items that they have listed are to connect the Chester Creek Trail to Sitka Street Park, create more opportunities for recreation, upgrade the playground, the amenities, and anyhow, so the master plan is not yet published, but it's close. So the timing is good for moving towards construction.
And so the master plan is complete enough that the projects will be eligible for bonding in 24.
That's what Diana with Anchorage Parks indicated.
Okay, because these would have to be to the design quality or percentage that they could be bonded to Parks and Rec. And so I appreciate the Parks Foundation's assistance. I just want to make sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll
Okay,
just briefly flag one other thing on this one, and that's that there's a trail connection to the senior center. So that's something that we might want to think about too.
They've done quite a bit of work, I think, with this challenge grant to make little trails wind in the woods, but and benches, it's really cool, and they continuing to activate that space would be very nice.
Absolutely. And long haul. I was community council president when we added this and got it on the first list for master planning. That was 8 years ago, 9 years ago. It's about time. Next item.
This is me again, Chester Creek Complex. It's basically to add some ADA upgrades to the area and safety and security. Anchorage Parks Foundation is saying that, this is kind of a recurring, every year we need to add amenities and do safety improvements and electrical upgrades in the Chester Creek complex. So that
Mr.
is
Wallen, did you have a question, Mr. Wallen? No, okay. No one else? Next item then. Ms. Braga.
So this one is for athletic fields, same thing. It's kind of an every year, add some love to the athletic fields around town. And if there is funding available to change. And well, I addressed the inclusive playground in another part of this, but there's a match from Senator Bill Walikowski for eliminating barriers to playgrounds, but this should be more athletic field safety improvements.
Any questions? I'm not hearing any. Next.
Do you want
Go
to do this,
ahead.
Member Boland?
Why don't you go ahead and do it? You have.
Okay, so this is the, so I mentioned it in the last, we have funds for match that came from Bill Wilikowski. The project would move for 2024, 150,000 is what was scheduled to be on the bond, move it up to 300,000. And 1/3 of Anchorage playgrounds are inclusive. And so we have a lot of work to do to make the playgrounds around our city accessible to all. And this is just work to right the wrong. In East Anchorage, the playgrounds that are targeted are accessibility level 4, which is the lowest level of accessibility.
So I do have a question from Ms. Brawley. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. It was kind of about both of these, and I think the next slide the next slide answers the question. Are these specific playgrounds already identified, or it looks like for this it is?
Yeah, for
the
this one
athletic
it
fields too.
is. And Bill Wilikowski's money match came in for the east side here. So it's Nunaka Valley North, South, and Ira Walker Playground are the ones that they are targeting.
Okay, thank you.
Next item.
This is an ongoing project in the bond on the mayor's proposal for parks. 300,000 was mentioned or was put in. We would like to bump that to 600,000. It has a match from the federal government, and they are working on ADA compliance, bridge improvements. The trail has huge cracks that are not safe for anyone, but definitely if you were using wheelchair, it would be hazardous. So we would like to continue to bring this old, much loved park up into compliance so that it's safe
I have
for
two
all.
questions. Go ahead, Ms. Zolotel, with your question.
So yeah, it's a broad CIB amendment to probably Ms. Bronga and Mr. Volin. Are you guys keeping, and I know Desiree is, but some kind of tally here that anything you're moving into Parks and Rec for 2024 kind of holds that $4 million typical bonding? Okay, I see heads nodding. Yes, great. Thank you.
Yep, I think the mayor's current proposal is around, I want to say 2.75, and so we're trying to keep it around 4, which is historic with the last 11 years of successfully passed parks bonds.
Okay. And do all of your amendments take up all of that capacity?
If you look at mine, it did, and then Member Volin has more in Mountain View. So, if we add all of his, then we're getting higher. I made sure.
Let's hold off on that part of the conversation because that could get very spicy. very quickly, and that's not the point of
Well,
today's conversation.
It's driving me toward a specific question about this
Yes.
amendment. That was some baseline.
Yeah.
Because increasing this request from 300 to 600, like, is there a specific reason? Was there a cost
Yeah.
escalator that
Meg, can I
specifically
answer that?
happened?
I think, Mike Braniff, are you here? Mr. Braniff,
I am.
is this the one we talked about this morning?
It is.
Can you please brief why the amount?
So we received a 600,000, Parks and Rec received a $600,000 ORLAP grant. We were informed of that this morning, and it requires a 1-to-1 match, and $600,000 here would provide that match.
To the dollar. So 600 is the number to hit the required match for money we received today. I don't know if that helps, Ms. Zalto.
I guess I'm surprised 2 members are bringing the amendment instead of the mayor, but fine.
Yeah, we could talk about that at length, but we won't today. That's for another day. Thank you. Next item. I guess I'm not surprised is my answer to that. Next
Okay,
item
so
is, go ahead.
Yeah, this is me. This is for Government Hill Neighborhood Parks. They have a project on the Government Hill Commons where there's a fence being installed and they want to do an art gate. And they've already received some funding. Parks and Rec has some funding, and there's some community members matched some of the funding as well. So I just want to accelerate the timeline for that project.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, this sounds like a great project, but maybe this is a question for Mr. Braniff. I was just curious, for these projects that are listed for future years, were they at any point supposed to be listed in 2024 and got moved, or is this really just looking ahead to things that were planned further out originally?
This particular project was not a 2024 project, so this is looking ahead.
Thank you. And I know it depends on the project as well.
It does. There's both varieties.
And what may come forward as an amendment to the future CIB on this, or CIP, is a master planning process for the new Track J Park, but I don't have an amendment for that today. So, okay, next item.
So this is an amendment to the CIP, the 2024-2029 Capital Improvement Plan program, and it essentially shifts the funding for the Cuddy Family Midtown Park Warming Facility, the chalet, from 2029 to 2025. I think the administration incorrectly thought that the funding from the private partners wouldn't be finalized until 2029, but after conversations with the planners, which is Anchorage Skates and a few other community groups, they are planning to get the full funding for this, the private side and the state side funding, by 2025. So this shifts it up so that the project isn't delayed unnecessarily.
Any questions? I'm not seeing any. Okay, let's move to the next one.
The next one is Miss Zalato.
Oh, we
Thank
already
you.
got 40. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Ms.
we've
Lawson.
been through all the slides. So I have a verbal amendment and I'll get it submitted and circulated via Desiree. As you know, we've been working on the Eklutna, Eklutna River restoration and where we intersect with that. And we have a work session scheduled for December. My amendment will be to use $35,000 to $40,000 of taxing capacity for us to be able to hire a consultant to walk us through the technical aspects of the various options being proposed and really get us some information so that we can be, it's a lot like what we've done with the port in the past where it's very technical in nature. We can get our own expert to really walk us through what the options are before we have to formally weigh in, especially since there are impacts to AWU, ratepayers, and taxpayers.
Questions on that one? Go ahead, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, sorry for the typo in the chat. And that one would be a consultant. So would they be producing a report or an analysis, like a product?
Yes, and I think the most important thing is they would probably come and do some written and then also be with us to hear our questions and help us navigate the technical reports that already exist and help us answer our questions and not be under payment by a particular, by the owners or a particular group.
So a third party.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Right. Are there any other questions on that? Hearing none. Desiree, can we move back to item number 3? No, excuse me, 4. Okay, it's next one. Yeah, that one. So there were a number of folks who expressed questions about this one. Now is a good time to begin those conversations. We have half an hour left. We have 2 items that were marked, and we can have further conversation on any of the other items after. Go ahead, Ms. Alatel.
Thank you. So my question here, since this was one time, is the intention here for all 3 million to go out in a single one-shot project, or is it intended to go out through, I guess I need a little bit more context. What I'm familiar with is something called the Housing Alaskans Public-Private Partnership, where they took a pot of money and they topped off various projects, and they did that one time. Or is this, because there's a huge list here. Or is this finding a project that might fit one of these things listed that would cost $3 million? Because I think there's 2 very different philosophies there.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm not necessarily looking to fund one $3 million project. Instead, with these funds, what I'm hoping is that we will get a bunch of small to medium-sized projects that we will be able to fund through this, because $3 million, that, getting to your point, that could be sort of the gap funding for one large project, but I really want to try to get as much little bits of housing as possible. I think going to the next slide, and my apologies, my computer is being weird. So what I'm really hoping with all of this is that the $3 million will, and I'm hoping to get it all deployed next year. I believe that the real estate department can do that successfully. They can deploy all $3 million in one fiscal year, but I want to do all of these things under the criteria. So whatever machinations of the $3 million from the RFP process gets us the most units, gets us the most density, gets us the least cost per unit, gets us the quickest amount of units that we can turn on, and gets us housing in different parts of town, which I know is something that we've talked about. Those are the goals that I really want to achieve.
Thanks. Quick follow-up is just in order, can I give feedback in order to be able to support an amendment? Chris, are you okay with that? Or Mr. Constant? You're on mute, sorry.
Yep, so these were the 2 items that were kind of needing more input. So I think carefully crafted, yes, a message could be stated that would help shape a project to make it a better product.
Yep. So within this criteria, the one bullet I would absolutely need to see is allows projects to submit prior funding applications or information, so it doesn't become another big application process in order to be able to access these funds. So it opens it up to smaller and larger developments and really is the widest swath possible. So it's not another onerous process in order to take it to participate.
So I had a question on that then. Is this different? Is this imagined differently than the matching funds we created for the Housing Land Trust to retrofit and improve deteriorating properties to keep them or put them back in use?
Thanks. Can you go back to the earlier slide, Desiree? So it is included in that list. I think this is a little bit more expansive. So yes, focus on rehabilitating vacant or abandoned properties, which is that AAHLT funding that we approved, but also doing gap funding, also doing rent stabilization for new projects, especially with some of the hotel conversions that we've had come online with those units as folks are trying to get connected to vouchers and other sources of funding. Typically, that first year of operations can be a little bit tricky. And so providing some of the rents to help for new projects coming online. So basically what I'm trying to do is build a bucket that meets a variety of different needs, as I understand it, in the community to make sure that our affordable housing projects are successful.
Okay, Anna, Ms. Brawley. Ms. Brawley, you had a question? Had a couple IT issues. So, let's see. Yeah, Anna's popping back in right now, so let's just hold half a second. Okay, maybe we'll come back to this. So.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
There you are. Okay, your question relating to number 4.
Yeah, and sorry, I only missed the last few seconds of the prior discussion. So just to clarify, it looks like this is for not necessarily new construction, but essentially renovating existing units. Is that correct?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm envisioning that these funds will not be used for new construction. I think that would likely be too expensive to fund a lot of new construction. It would eat up the funds very quickly.
Okay, and then my other question was, so it's describing a fund, which often means like your capital.
I think we might have lost you, Anna. So I'm gonna pivot quickly for a new question while Ms. Brawley gets back. Somehow our IT issues. I'm hoping that the sponsor can draft up some kind of memo to associate with the amendment, because as you know, when an amendment goes into the budget, that's it. And the kind of guidance that's here, I could easily see this being kind of turned into something it wasn't intended to be by the other branch of government. And so having some kind of a tool, this is a really good start that kind of identifies your vision a little bit more to attach with it, so that when the amendment, if it is passes, it is implemented with good faith. So just a suggestion, Mr. Bond.
Thank you. Actually, can I be in the queue when we're not, are we still on a specific item? I was trying to do some math.
Yeah, we are still on number 4, the one-time money, and we still have one more, which is the number 12.
Okay, when we're not tied to a specific amendment, can you come back to me, Chair?
Yeah, and then also, but before you also already, we have Ms. Zalatil and Ms. Brawley in for a kind of an overview conversation of the process going forward. So if yours is brief, we'll let you go first. If not, we'll let them. So Ms. Brawley, we can't, I'm told we missed an amendment. Ms. Brawley, can you speak so we can see if we can hear you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. So you had a question relating to this item.
Yeah, and I'll just be brief. It was really about this housing fund. Often when we create funds, there's basically you put in an initial capital amount and then you spin off dividends, or, so that you're never spending down the permanent aspect. So my question was, is the intent that this is something that would continue year over year? And if so, then I'm questioning the statement that we would spend it all down in year 1.
Mr.
Yeah,
Rivera.
thanks. Thank you. So good question. So I'm envisioning that in future years, and it's part of the reason why this is one time, that depending on funding availability, that we will be able to add funds, whether that's some type of permanent funding stream, whether that's continuing to go through the budget process and add funds, at least for the short term, until we figure out what the long-term plan is. But I don't want to wait until we figure out what the long-term plan is, whether that's I know there was a lot of conversation around a land bank or a local housing authority, like whatever that is. I can see this a fund eventually maybe transforming into that. But in the short term, I want us to be able to do work, and I think this housing fund allows that capability. So short answer is I do want these funds to be used next fiscal year, and then I want us to find additional funds, frankly, to fund future fiscal years.
But it's not intended as an endowed type fund where only the interest of this is being used.
Correct.
That was, I think, the gist of part of the question at least. Okay, yeah, it's a fund in the sense of projects can be funded, but not only, $300,000 or $30,000, whatever the interest would be spent. So Ms. Braga,
So I know that this is not for that, but there's been talk about year-round shelter, and I know Felix, you're doing the clean slate identifying shelter. I haven't seen anywhere that anyone's setting aside funds for that. Can you tell me if I just missed it or?
Thanks. No, you didn't miss it. And I am holding that conversation for April. Because I think that would be right now we're going through the location process, and I think that is going to drive the cost is the locations that we eventually end up choosing, at least for the capital side, and then the operating is going to be the operating, right? But that is a conversation I hope to have in April.
Okay, thank you.
And I would add, frankly, in the context of where is the administration's proposal for these things, that they really do have a duty to provide the first stab at these questions. In particular, what is the cost and value and how will we implement year-round shelter? As much as Mr. Rivera is doing the Lions work, I want to have the folks in the administration who are probably listening understand that it really is your role to provide the first proposal. And so all that work is in lieu of inputs from the proper branch of government. And so, Ms. Zalto, there was a project that we skipped, apparently.
So yeah, it's my fault completely, but it was $100,000 using taxing capacity to the Anchorage Downtown Partnership as the equivalent of a PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. I know Ms. Braga was going to work on it, or I was going to work on it anyway. Wanted to put it all on your radars. We did receive a very detailed request from the Downtown Partnership, so wanted to put that in everyone's brain to be thinking about and can get that drafted really quick and circulated. My apologies.
All right. So any questions? If not, let's move on to, I think it's item number 12 on the list.
Can I say one more thing about the Downtown Partnership? Radhika told me that they spent $18,000 on the restroom by the Bridge Restaurant in Ship Creek. I had no idea, but for 3 months of maintenance and opening and closing it, they had it shut at night. So that's one of the costs I know that added up.
Yep, and I think on that note, we really need to have her approach the Visit Anchorage, because that facility primarily serves tourists, and they are going to have the biggest year ever in their budget because of the effects of the taxing structure that we have. And so please, let's direct Radhika on that 18,000, not the PILT. The PILT question is separate. That 18,000 should really come from Visit Anchorage. So, okay, let's move back to item 12. There were a number of people in the queue to discuss the labor increase proposal. And I'd say we have maybe 5 minutes or so to talk about this. Who wants to jump in?
Can I go ahead with my
Zalto.
question?
Fire
Yeah,
away.
so I just wanted to verify that this contract would go into effect January 1, 2024. So it needs to be done before, in this budget cycle right now.
That's a good question. So I know the contract has been ratified by the APDA membership. So it's going through process, and yeah, you might know more than I do about how long that will take before it comes before the assembly. But I believe the intent, anyways, is for it to go into effect at the very beginning of 2024. And
Thank
I might
you.
have a better answer to that. Yes, January 1. I just got confirmation.
Other questions? There were a number of people in the queue on this one. So I'll just join and say that the skinny in all of this is that there is a 4-year substantial increase of labor costs to APD, and this is year 1 of a series that we should be preparing for, so that we are mentally prepared to vote yes when and if we approve the agreement that will be coming to us soon. So, and I'll put in the chat that Radhika clarified that $18,000 is private contract with the railroad, not the muni, or excuse me, not paid for by the Business Improvement District funds. And I just added that, yeah, it shouldn't be paid for by the muni. That 18, but the 100 is a different story. We'll talk about that on the merits. So, if there's no further discussion about specific amendments, Mr. Volland?
Let's do this. I think I'm doing Meg math over here because I've added this a couple times and I've gotten different numbers. I do think we're over between the projects that
Right.
that I did and
So,
Karen.
Daniel, I think Meg can and Anna can discuss next what's going to happen, because we aren't going to do the math here
Right.
in this setting, and so and be scared. We're going to trust Meg to do the math, and so but luckily we have good support. And so Meg and Anna, you have the floor to kind of brief folks on what's
Great.
coming.
Yeah, great. So a little bit of process and a question. So on the capital improvement budget, I think since Ms. Bronga and Mr. Voland were kind of the primary architects of a lot of those, particularly where you had overlap, if you two could confer and get back to Desiree on kind of where you land on those that overlap, that would be really helpful. We will work with Desiree to keep track of the overall amounts we're putting towards either taxing capacity or amount that would go toward a bond. I've heard, and of course, if I'm wrong or you have a different opinion about that, you should let Desiree know that the parks bond usually stays around 4 million, and that's kind of our target. So then the same kind of question on general government and alcohol tax is if you can convey, what Anna and I plan to do is to take these and put them into a couple of omnibus amendments, because it's just easier to deal with on the floor. What we would like to know, though, is if there's a strenuous objection about any of these being included in an omnibus amendment, to let Desiree know so we can know to exclude them, and just let that member know that there's a strenuous enough objection that it's going to run on the floor separately. Partly this is just ease of administration and keeping track of this math. And it will look like, and the intention is to then, when we are on the floor, run the omnibus and turn to each member or the sponsors to speak to it on the floor. It doesn't usurp your opportunity to get to speak to what's important. And then the other piece to that is if there were any other amendments that came up, knowing that we're going to try to work in omnibus, we're going to have to make a cutoff of about Tuesday of next week for anything to be included in a potential omnibus, because then Anna and I are traveling and you'll still have the opportunity to run them on the floor. So it's just kind of a little bit of housekeeping there. Anything you want to add, Anna?
Yeah, I'll just emphasize, the reason this is different than other types of amendments is because we ultimately have to have a balanced budget and we can't over allocate, especially, capital budget's a separate issue because that's really looking at bonding, but for the operating budget and alcohol tax, we don't want to approve things that we then can't fund. And so that's why the math matters here. But that said, we certainly want to try to make room as much as possible. And then of course we can look at amendments on the floor so it doesn't have to all be pre-decided by that omnibus.
Mr. Bond.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to comment on the parks bond just one more time. So, and maybe we can, I don't know if Director Braniff is still on the call. I guess for me, it would be interesting to maybe have a sense of the body and like, how comfortable are we with, if the park bond has been the same for the last 11 years, do we want to be a little bit more ambitious? Are folks comfortable if it, is more than 4 but less than 5? I guess I just don't really have a frame of reference, or is it preferred to keep it at the same level?
I'll
I
speak
guess
to
that's
that briefly. Just think about other potential items that are going to go on the ballot. And if for example, toilet bond goes, that's a substantial increase depending on the size of the school board request. And so it's not a unilateral, and yeah, Randy, that wasn't intentional, by the way. That was a bad pun. Um, the reality is that we have to be sensible. So that said, any member can propose any number of items. And so just know that there are other competing priorities that will all be on the same ballot.
I was thinking to try to keep for sure in the low 400 just because of the CASA. People are, if that's on the ballot as well, we know that making access to Chugach Park was a big priority, and people may kind of lump that together and think, wow, that we want 5.6 million for the CASA and for parks, and we could just start getting people checking no. I don't know. I get fearful of that.
Right, so that's just thing to contemplate as we move towards the final. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to briefly mention two other things, and I'm sure members Alatal can speak to this as well. One is in the capital budget right now, there is a great deal of state capital requests, and I forgot to mention that we were going to look at that again and contemplate, especially I think with road projects, if there's ones that we should move to the bond so that they don't get delayed. So we don't have a specific list right now. The other one to mention is we did not bring any amendments around enterprise and utilities, but there were some proposed essentially labor or scrub or whatever they were called, reductions to those budgets. And as previously discussed, those budgets are separate and it does not reduce ratepayers' rates essentially. So it's our intent to also reverse those, but we are aware that the administration may be bringing an S version. So we're also just monitoring that, but I wanted to mention.
So, man, it dawns on me now, we did not continue the public hearings on the enterprise bond.
We did. No, we did.
Did that one? We did. Okay, good. Okay, excellent. That was my concern. Then Ms. Alatil, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think what we can do is, I think for the CIB, because these are amendments to the capital improvement budget, the budget is different than the bond. So I think, you need to have it in the year for the CIB. However, whether or not something on the CIB in a year makes it onto the bond is another question. So I think that dollar amount question, we should be mindful about it, but we can kick the can down the road a little bit and kind of get the fuller context before we enter into that bond discussion in January. Just remember that if you're going to be adding projects to the bond, and be mindful that you'll need to make sure you're involving bond counsel. And so that planning is important. This is step one of a multi-step process that we're working through. So I think I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
So, are there any other comments, questions, concerns relating to the amendments? Everybody, as Mr. Ballin said, I might have to start reading through these myself. That's your homework, is to know where you fall on these items, because all of them in one shape or another will be presented to you on the 21st. And so whether they all pass is another question. That's not the issue before us today. And you'll have your opportunity for advocacy when we open the deliberations on the item. So if there's nothing else, then I'm going to adjourn us.
Oh, Mr. Chair, sorry, I had
Go
one
ahead.
quick question.
ahead.
So just if somebody has put forward an amendment and then they decide they don't want to move it, I just procedurally, then what would somebody do in that situation?
They would notify Desiree, and Desiree will make sure everybody who is working on the budget project has it, and it won't end up in any of the, if it's not after, it's too late in the omnibus efforts. And if an item is printed in the amendment packet, it doesn't matter. If the sponsor says, I don't want to move it, then they won't move it. If someone else likes it, I've seen it happen, they'll move it instead, and then it becomes other members' amendment. So, you know, that's the fun part of this is we get to all kind of sort through, and if you can get to 7, it's in there.
You have Desiree's hand.
Desiree.
So I just want to say the sooner you get me information, the better. If you want to pull an amendment, just let me know and I'll remove it from the amendment packet for November 21st. Yeah, just keep me in the loop as soon as possible because everything's happening and it is not good to wait till the 20th or the 21st.
If
Okay.
we want to be added to one of these, should we just contact one of the sponsors, or
No,
Desiree,
I
is
would
that
say,
better to ask you?
Desiree, just because at some point they might have 3 members as sponsors and it just creates difficulty for folks. And so all communications on specific items at this point should be to Desiree. Okay, anyone else? Thank you all. I can't believe we got through 47 amendments in the time that we had. Thank you for your tolerance of the clock push and our ability to come back to items. So with that, we'll be adjourned and we have a few more work sessions today. Hi,
Aw.
Junie. Hi, Junie. All right, talk to y'all later.
Bye-bye.